Hello, fellow history lovers and English learners. Welcome back to our cozy storytelling corner. It is a pleasure to have you here as we embark on another journey through the mists of time. Before we begin, I want you to close your eyes for a moment and listen to the rhythm of your own breath. Have you ever wondered what remains of a person once the gold and the crowns are stripped away? Is greatness measured by the lands we conquer, or by the stories that survive us? Today, we are not just looking at a name in a dusty textbook. We are reaching back across 2,000 years to touch the life of a woman who was a goddess to some, a villain to others, but a brilliant, breathing soul to herself. She was the last flame of an ancient world, a queen who spoke 9 languages and navigated the most dangerous political waters in history. Let us step into the warm, golden sands of the Nile and discover the true heart of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. The story of the woman we know as Cleopatra begins in the year 69 before Common Era in the magnificent city of Alexandria. To understand her, you must understand the city of her birth. Alexandria was a jewel of the Mediterranean, a place where the salt of the sea met the scent of ancient papyrus. It was a city of marble libraries and towering lighthouses, a place where the greatest minds of the world gathered to debate the stars and the soul. However, the royal palace of the Ptolemy family was not a place of peace. It was a gilded cage filled with shadows and whispers. Cleopatra was born into a dynasty of Greek blood that had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was a man who struggled to keep his throne, often relying on the rising power of Rome to stay alive. From a very young age, the young princess watched as her family members fought, betrayed, and even killed one another for the sake of a crown. She learned early that in the game of power, there was no room for weakness. While other children might have played with toys, Cleopatra played with ideas. She spent hours in the great library, devouring scrolls on philosophy, mathematics, and rhetoric. She was a brilliant student who understood that knowledge was the only weapon that could not be taken away. She was the first in her line to learn the Egyptian language, showing a deep respect for the people she would one day rule. This childhood was not one of simple luxury. It was an intense education in survival, shaped by the constant threat of exile and the weight of a dying empire. Chapter 1: The Scholar Princess and the Dying Sun. As Cleopatra grew into a young woman, she became more than just a royal heir. She became a visionary. In the year 51 before Common Era, her father passed away, leaving the kingdom to 18-year-old Cleopatra and her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. According to the traditions of their family, they were to rule together as husband and wife, but Cleopatra had no intention of being a secondary figure. She saw Egypt not as a fading relic of the past, but as a potential superpower that could stand equal to Rome. She began to style herself as the new Isis, the mother goddess of the Nile, connecting her image to the ancient traditions of her people. While her brother's advisors sought to control her and push her into the background, Cleopatra fought for her autonomy. The palace was a nest of vipers, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and conspiracy. She realized that her brother's regents were plotting her downfall, and eventually, they succeeded in driving her out of the capital. Cleopatra found herself in exile, standing on the edges of the Syrian desert, with nothing but her intellect and a small group of loyal followers. Most people would have given up, but Cleopatra was different. She looked at the horizon and saw not a dead end, but a new beginning. She began to raise an army, proving that her voice could command soldiers as easily as it commanded poets. This period of isolation was her true crucible. It was where she learned that to lead a nation, she first had to lead herself. She understood that she could not return to Alexandria as a beggar. She had to return as a force of nature. The world was changing rapidly, and the shadow of Rome was stretching across the sea. In Rome, the great general Julius Caesar had just defeated his rival Pompey and was seeking to settle the debts and disputes of Egypt. This was the moment Cleopatra had been preparing for her entire life. She knew that if she could win Caesar to her side, she would win Egypt back. But Caesar was in the palace of Alexandria, surrounded by her brother's guards. To reach him, she had to be invisible. This leads us to one of the most famous moments in history, though the reality was likely more about courage than theater. She had herself smuggled into the palace, hidden inside a large laundry bag or a rolled-up carpet, carried by a loyal servant. When the bag was opened and she stepped out before the most powerful man in the Roman world, she did not look like a fugitive. She looked like a queen. She didn't use only her beauty to charm him. As many stories say, she used her mind. She spoke to him of politics, of empire, and of a shared future. Caesar, a man who had seen everything, was mesmerized by this 21-year-old woman who possessed the wisdom of a sage and the fire of a warrior. Together, they defeated the forces of her brother in the Alexandrian War. Cleopatra was restored to her throne, and the sun seemed to shine brighter over the Nile. Chapter 2. The Dream of an Eastern Empire. With Caesar by her side, Cleopatra entered a period of unprecedented influence. She was no longer just a ruler of a Mediterranean kingdom. She was a major player on the global stage. She followed Caesar to Rome, living in a villa near the Tiber River. Her presence in the heart of the Roman Republic was a scandal. The Romans were a conservative people who mistrusted kings and queens, and yet they were fascinated by her. She brought with her the luxury of the East, her knowledge of administration, and a vision of a unified world. Some historians believe she even influenced Caesar's ideas about how a state should be run. She gave birth to a son, Caesarion, whom she hoped would one day bridge the gap between the two worlds, uniting the heritage of the pharaohs with the power of Rome. However, dreams built on individuals are fragile. In the year 44 before Common Era, on the Ides of March, Caesar was assassinated. The world Cleopatra had tried to build crumbled in a single afternoon. She had to flee Rome, returning to an Egypt that was once again vulnerable and alone. The loss of her partner was a tragedy, but for a queen, grief is a luxury she cannot afford. She returned to her people, working tirelessly to manage the economy, distribute grain during a famine, and strengthen her military. She was a mother now, not just to her son, but to her nation. She knew that the Roman civil wars were far from over, and soon, a new leader would rise who would need the wealth of Egypt. The man who emerged from the chaos was Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and a powerful general who now controlled the eastern provinces of Rome. In the year 41 before Common Era, he summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus. This was perhaps the most calculated and magnificent move of her career. She arrived on a barge with purple sails and silver oars, the air filled with the scent of exotic perfumes and the sound of flutes. She appeared as the goddess Aphrodite, surrounded by beauty and grace. Antony, a man of passion and appetites, was completely overwhelmed. But once again, while the world focused on the romance, Cleopatra was focusing on the alliance. She needed Rome's protection, and Antony needed Egypt's wealth. Their partnership became one of the most famous love stories in human history, but it was also a daring political gamble. They lived together in Alexandria, a city they transformed into a cultural capital that rivaled Rome itself. They had 3 children together, and for a few golden years, it seemed as though they might actually succeed in creating a new kind of empire, one that was inclusive and multicultural. Cleopatra was at the height of her powers, ruling a kingdom that stretched from the borders of Libya to the coast of Arabia. She was truly the Queen of Kings, a title she proudly bestowed upon herself and her children. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm of Actium. But the gods are often jealous of human ambition. In Rome, a young and cold-blooded leader named Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, was watching. He saw Cleopatra not as a romantic heroine, but as a dangerous threat to the Roman way of life. He began a massive propaganda campaign against her, painting her as a foreign temptress who had bewitched a Roman general and stolen his senses. He did not declare war on Antony. He declared war on Cleopatra, making it a conflict of cultures and values. The tension grew until it reached a breaking point in the year 31 before Common Era at the Battle of Actium. This was a naval battle on the Ionian Sea, a clash of massive ships and even bigger egos. Cleopatra was there on her flagship, commanding her own fleet. However, the battle was a disaster for her side. Seeing the tide turn, Cleopatra retreated with her ships, and Antony, in a moment of desperate love or perhaps madness, abandoned his troops to follow her. This moment marked the beginning of the end. They fled back to Egypt, pursued by the shadow of Octavian's inevitable arrival. The luxury of the palace in Alexandria now felt like a tomb. The grand banquets were replaced by somber planning sessions. Cleopatra knew that the world she had tried to build was falling apart, and the Roman legions were marching toward the gates of her city. The year that followed the Battle of Actium was a slow, agonizing wait for the inevitable. Cleopatra and Antony tried to negotiate with Octavian, offering to abdicate or go into exile. But the young Roman was uninterested in mercy. He wanted Egypt, and he wanted Cleopatra as his prize to be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains. As Octavian's forces closed in on Alexandria, the bond between Antony and Cleopatra remained, but it was tinged with the bitterness of failure. In the year 30 before Common Era, a false report reached Antony that Cleopatra had died. In his overwhelming grief, he fell upon his sword. He was brought to the monument where Cleopatra was hiding, and he died in her arms, a tragic end for a man who had once ruled half the world. Cleopatra was now truly alone. She was a captive in her own palace, watched by guards, her children's lives hanging in the balance. She met with Octavian, and even in her lowest moment, she tried to use her legendary intellect to find a way out. But she realized that there was no way to save her crown or her dignity while remaining alive. She was a descendant of Alexander the Great, a pharaoh of the Nile, and she would not allow herself to be humiliated for the entertainment of the Roman mob. Chapter 4. The Final Breath of the Pharaohs. The final days of Cleopatra are shrouded in legend and mystery, yet they remain deeply human. On a warm August day, she prepared for her final act. She asked for a grand meal, dressed herself in her finest royal robes, and placed the crown of Egypt upon her head. She wrote a letter to Octavian, asking to be buried alongside Mark Antony. Then, according to the story that has survived through the centuries, she had a basket of figs brought to her, inside of which was hidden a poisonous snake, the asp, a symbol of divine royalty in Egypt. She chose a death that was both a political statement and a spiritual passage. By dying from the bite of a cobra, she was asserting her identity as a goddess, returning to the arms of the divine. When Octavian's soldiers broke into her room, they found her lying on a golden couch, looking as peaceful as if she were merely sleeping. Her two loyal handmaidens, Iras and Charmian, had also taken their own lives to be with her. One of the soldiers shouted in anger, asking if this was a job well done. Charmian, with her final breath, replied that it was indeed a job well done, befitting the descendant of so many kings. Cleopatra was 39 years old. With her death, the 3,000-year history of the pharaohs came to an end. Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, and the ancient world was changed forever. The tragedy of Cleopatra is not just in her death, but in how she has been remembered. For centuries, her story was written by her enemies. The Romans described her as a woman of excessive lust and oriental deceit. They reduced one of the most brilliant political minds of the era to a mere caricature of a seductress. They wanted to forget that she was a skilled administrator who spoke many languages, a mother who fought for her children's future, and a ruler who was genuinely loved by her people. She was a woman who navigated a world of men with more grace and intelligence than most of them possessed. She was a queen who understood that power is not just about force, but about the stories we tell and the images we project. The tragedy of her life was the collision between an old world of majestic monarchs and a new world of cold, bureaucratic empire. She was the last person who truly believed that a woman from the East could lead the entire world. Her failure was not a result of a lack of skill, but of the overwhelming tide of history that no single person, no matter how brilliant, could stop. Chapter 5. a legacy that defies time. Today, more than 2,000 years after she took her final breath, Cleopatra remains one of the most famous figures in all of human history. Her name is known in every corner of the globe. She has been the subject of countless paintings, plays, operas, and films. From William Shakespeare to Elizabeth Taylor, artists have tried to capture the essence of the woman who melted the hearts of the greatest Romans. But the true legacy of Cleopatra is not found in Hollywood movies. It is found in the enduring power of her intellect and her refusal to be a victim of her circumstances. She proved that a woman could be a scholar, a politician, a commander, and a mother all at once. She showed that culture and knowledge are just as important to a nation's strength as its army. In Egypt today, the ruins of Alexandria still whisper her name, and archaeologists continue to search for her lost tomb, hoping to find one final secret from the woman who captivated the world. Her vision of a multicultural empire may have failed in her lifetime, but the idea of a connected, global civilization is one that we are still working toward today. We can learn a great deal from the last pharaoh. Her life teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. She teaches us that our identity is something we create for ourselves, regardless of what the world says about us. She was a woman who lived with passion and died with dignity, refusing to let her enemies define her end. One of the most meaningful things we can take from her story is the importance of perspective. To the Romans, she was a threat. To the Egyptians, she was a protector. To herself, she was a woman trying to save her heritage in a collapsing world. As we look back on her journey, we are reminded that history is rarely black and white. It is a rich tapestry of colors, emotions, and choices. Cleopatra's light may have been extinguished long ago, but the warmth of her story continues to inspire anyone who has ever dreamed of something greater than the world they were born into. As she once said through her actions, "I will not be led in triumph." She chose her own path, even when it led into the dark. And so, my dear friends, we come to the end of our journey along the Nile. I hope that by listening to this story, you have felt the heat of the Egyptian sun and the cool marble of the Alexandrian libraries. Cleopatra was a woman of immense complexity, a queen who lived on the edge of two worlds and refused to blink. As you continue your own journey of learning English and exploring the vast landscape of history, I want you to think about your own legacy. What kind of story are you writing with your life today? How will you handle the challenges and Romans that stand in your way? Cleopatra's life reminds us that even when we face overwhelming odds, our voice and our mind are our greatest assets. Never be afraid to be the smartest person in the room, and never be afraid to stand up for what you believe is right. I would love to hear your thoughts on this incredible woman. Do you think Cleopatra was a hero who tried to save her country, or a politician who was only interested in her own power? Do you think the world would be different today if she and Mark Antony had won the Battle of Actium? Please share your reflections in the comments below. Your insights and your voice are a vital part of our community. Thank you for spending this time with me in our storytelling corner. If you enjoyed this journey, please remember to subscribe and share this story with other language learners and history enthusiasts. Every word you learn and every story you hear brings us closer together. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep learning, and remember that you are the author of your own legend. Sleep well, or have a beautiful day, wherever you are in the world. Good luck with your English studies, and I will see you in our next chapter of history.